just wanted to thank you for doing this, and I'm so grateful that we met.
Oh,
Um, and that you've been such a great friend to me and so supportive. And I appreciate you answering some of these questions for me. I'm gonna look forward to hearing your answers because you have so much wisdom. So,
thank you,
um,
Christina. I just want to say I so much appreciate your friendship too.
oh,
You've
that's
been
nice.
instrumental in me getting things in my life that I wasn't getting or understanding before, and it's just really great. So,
That's very
thanks.
sweet of you to say. Um, so before I start with the questions, I just want you to be able to tell us. I know you have a website and you're on Instagram and you have a YouTube channel. So if you could tell us what how we can follow you on those places, which I already do, but I enjoy
Okay.
doing that, and maybe other people would love to know more about you.
Oh, thank you. So the best place to go is my website. That's kind of the hub where
Hmm.
I have all my social media connections. So there's icons you can click on to go away from my website to the different social media platforms. My website is sunshineartnapa.com. So it's just like who, what, where.
Hmm. I like that. That's
Thanks.
great. That's awesome. And then on there, people can go to YouTube or Instagram if they choose to.
Yes, I
Hmm.
might not have my YouTube connected right now because I just updated my website, but
Hmm.
at least you can get to the Instagram and Facebook. And I was thinking of connecting my YouTube with my Instagram again. So I don't know. I always kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
dabble.
With
Yeah.
all these platforms, it's hard to keep them all straight, right? Yeah, I totally get that. So, my first question is, how did you get started in art?
Oh gosh. It's kind of like how long was I held back from it? How long were the reins just holding me back from starting? Because I feel like even as a little child, my happiest memories were when I was creative. And it doesn't matter if it was, I remember making mud pies and being so happy and putting these little daisies in the mud pies. And I remember building forts out of these funky chairs and pieces of cardboard and stuff. And then I would sit down in the fort and I'd just look around and I'd love and admire the fort. And then I'd tear it down and start over again because it was just a creative process that I just loved. And when we would color in coloring books, I knew that I was good at it. So there's a little ego in there, but I just really enjoyed it, and enjoyed. I remember have memories of dancing a few times when I was a child,
Yeah.
and just those opportunities to dance and
Yeah.
have fun. It was very good.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was a very visceral emotional experience for you where it just came very natural to you and you felt the joy in doing it. It wasn't like a cognitive decision that you make. It was just something that evolved over
Mhm.
time.
And
And
it took me a long time to realize that I really do love it, and that
mhm,
it's very important to to me. It's just an
right.
important part of me being healthy
Mhm.
because it is so much a part of who I am and I feel like it's my purpose.
Mhm.
So not just to do
Yeah.
art, but, to
Yeah, so
encourage
it's a very
others.
it sounds like it's a very integral part of who you are.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. So I remember you telling me that you were also an art teacher in the school system for a few years, right?
I taught at a private school for a few years, and I taught pre-K through 8th grade.
Wow.
So, and that was just the most creative, exciting time for me because I was creating curriculum responding to the California requirement, the guidelines
Mhm.
for each step in development for the children. So I was kind of creating these things that were at their grade level, and they were just so much fun, and the kids just had a great time. And I've always kind of had, people ask me, will you teach me art or will you teach my child art?
Mhm.
And when it works, I say yes. And for the last 5 years, I've been working with a small group and I love them, and I'm so happy that they're in my life. And
Yeah.
yeah, so we work together just once a week. And now
Yeah.
I only, during COVID, I only have one student who I see on Zoom, because for the other students, I just keep in touch with them through email.
Mhm.
So they're just practicing their work on their own right now, but
Mhm.
they're looking forward to coming back and, together again.
That's great. I mean, I know, yeah, I found you somehow on Instagram. I don't remember, but during the lockdown last year, I somehow came across your artwork on Instagram and I loved it. I really resonated with it. And I remember writing to you and asking you, do you offer, do you tutor or do you
Oh,
offer courses online? Um, and at that point, you weren't doing courses online, and you referred me to Louise Fletcher's course that was
oh,
just about to start. And so
yeah.
you're very generous with your time and your knowledge, and I really appreciate you because even when you feel like you can't, um, you know, provide for someone what they need at that moment, you're willing to share your knowledge of other artists and other teachers. So I appreciate that. But you do offer your knowledge freely on YouTube. You have free, tutorials that you upload all the time, and I love watching you paint. The process that you go
Oh,
through is
thank
just
you.
so fun, to watch you. So that's great. All right, so let's see. My next question is, what I know that you do. I don't. What would you call your art? How would you
Um,
define?
I well, I only call it abstract, but I also call it mixed media, because um, it's hard for me. I was doing oil painting for a few years, but it's really hard for me to leave things out of it. I want to get these really different materials in my work. Like lately, it's been thread. So, so I'm
Yeah,
creating these pieces of tissue paper with thread, and I didn't even think of making a video of that, but that's probably that would might be a fun thing to do.
yeah, yeah.
So just these different, unusual things, and I really like to use, especially things that would go into, recycling or the garbage,
Hmm.
because I just feel like it's good to look at things in a different way.
Hmm.
So I feel like that's kind of that message of, like, and a bunch of broken things coming together and making
Yeah,
something that is, a gift. So
right. Yeah, and that's another thing I love about your artwork is that you do find these ways of repurposing something that's used, in another way, pretty mundanely, and then you take something that's so mundane and you add it to a piece of artwork and you just transform it into something so beautiful. And even to think of using that, like I wouldn't have thought to use thread in my artwork, and your pieces are just beautiful, and it certainly adds a lot to them. So
thank
it's
you.
really interesting how you approach it. So, what made you decide to do abstract versus realistic painting?
I had to get honest with myself about how uncomfortable it was to just do tedious work. I can get really realistic. I can do real. Anyone can. I really believe anyone can learn
Hmm.
to draw. And
Hmm.
I loved it in high school because that was my high school class, first thing in the morning. And I was like, yes. And it was realistic. It was drawing, still life.
Hmm.
So we learned a little bit of drawing and painting. And I was horrible with color at the time. I got like A's in all the drawing projects, but the color
Hmm.
projects, I did not get A's. I got C's. So, but anyway, what was I saying about why did I choose when did I choose abstract? How did I just got honest with myself, and I've always kind of had this kind of a feeling like, if you can take a picture of it, why spend all those hours rendering something that's perfectly, exactly, shadows
Hmm.
exactly where they are and everything? I feel like I would rather allow God to work through me to say
Hmm.
something beautiful to people, um, in a way that's beyond my understanding. That's what
Hmm.
I want. That's what I've always wanted. So that's
I
kind of my
see.
my transition.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so do you ever have an artist block?
I think what I experience sometimes more than, I wouldn't call it a block. I would call it um, criticism or discouragement.
Mhm.
Um, yes, definitely,
Mhm.
definitely. I don't ever really feel blocked. I think I always want to work, whether it's even
Mhm.
just mixing colors or whether it's even just doodling. It's something that I just want to do like all the time, kind of like
Mhm.
it's like it's what makes me tick.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I feel discouraged sometimes. And I've
Mhm.
realized that recently, I realized that sometimes it might take 2 years or 3 years for a painting to find its home.
Mhm.
So why do I worry about that? Why do I
Mhm.
worry that, well, this painting must not be good because it's shown in the gallery for 1 month and a
Yeah.
couple hundred people have seen it and didn't spend money on it.
Yeah.
How can I equate that with failing?
Yeah.
It's just what you're like, we're so self-critical. And that's part of my journey right now, Christina, is
Mhm.
learning to not be self-critical. That's part of,
Mhm.
I feel like, what I'm learning from you.
Well, that's hard
You
for
know,
all of us, I think. Yeah, it's certain,
yeah,
whether you're an artist or not, I think that the critic is always on, your shoulder, you know. That's hard for all of us to overcome sometimes. But do you
yeah,
find that you just push yourself to do it, no matter what?
I do. I just carry on. I think
Mhm.
it's important to keep, momentum. There was one point my children were still growing. I stopped painting. I know it was 6 solid years. And I guess it was fairly early in my marriage. And there was just so much going on and I wanted to create art, but I felt so discouraged about it.
Mhm.
I just realized why, because I took my work to a gallery and she didn't respond to it,
I
and I
see.
felt like, gosh, this gallery is so in tune with my, like, it's just the right place, that's how I
Yeah.
felt. But they ended up closing like a
Mhm.
month or two later. So maybe she was
Mhm.
just kind of in a transition mode. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a great lesson, that we learn sometimes, that just because it wasn't right for us at a particular time or in a particular place, regardless of what you're doing, whether it's music or art or something else, it may just be that at that moment in time it wasn't right, but then something comes down the line, and if you're being authentic and real to yourself, that eventually things click, and now you have a gallery that you sell your work at, and you sound that it sounds like you enjoy that space,
Hmm.
you know
Yeah.
so that's
I
great.
really love having the marketing not my job solely. If I
Mhm.
could have a marketing someone do all my marketing, I would be so happy. But I don't think that there really is such a thing. I don't know if there is. I haven't found it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's certainly super expensive for the people that do that,
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
it's hard, it is. um let's see, so who are some of the artists that have inspired you in the past?
Oh gosh, I love Kandinsky. Um, and let's see, I love Van Gogh. Always loved Van Gogh.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of the impressionist painters are
Yeah.
really, yeah, that's kind of, and then modern art all the way through, like, Mark Rothko. What people
Hmm.
are breaking the barriers and
Hmm.
experimenting and doing things in a new way. Like,
Hmm.
I did a series based on uh, Jackson Pollock.
Mm.
So, and I named it Dancing with Pollock because as I was, I had you paint with the canvases on the floor, and
Right.
as I was swirling and dropping the paint, it was like a dance, and so I thought,
Yeah.
I'm dancing with Jackson. you know. So, yeah,
Right. Yeah, and that's the one thing I've learned about art over the last few years, as abstract art specifically, is that there's so many different forms, and some of it can be gestural art, so that the
Mhm,
painting you're looking at really involves the gestures of the artist. I mean, all of it
mhm.
it really involves the gestures of the artist, but there are some specialties where the point of creating the art is the gestures that you make, you
Yes.
know. And I think Pollock, in my mind, fits into that category of gestural artists, you know, that it wasn't really about expressing something so much as the movement and what you create with the movement and how what that looks like. So,
Yes,
and
so
that can be
wonderful.
really freeing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good way that, the viewer, the art, the art collector connects with the artist when there's marks showing, because it's the evidence of that working that artist did standing,
Hmm.
um in that, right in front of that painting, and then it's like a, I don't know, it's a communication that,
Right.
and especially if there's a lot of texture, I feel like that really evokes a lot more emotion than flat. I used to flatten everything out, and I used to
Yeah.
cover all my marks. And so,
Right.
I've really thought a lot about mark making. I think it's kind of there's a lot of conversation about mark making in the last few
Hmm.
years. And it's really made me think of how it connects with people,
Hmm.
um, and how healthy it is for the artist to be free, to be themselves, and not be like smoothing everything over, which I used to
Yeah.
do. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think I also look at it as there's a difference between reading something someone wrote when it's typewritten, right, from
mhm.
a typewriter or a computer, and versus reading it in their own penmanship, right? Because you can really see their personality and their effort in their own calligraphy. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's almost better that it's not perfect because you can see, you know, I don't know, they're I don't know, you can tell more about a person by reading their penmanship than looking at something that was just typed. And I think that is a form of art, you know, and I think that is mark making, you know?
It is.
Yeah. Let's see. So do you find that creating art is therapeutic?
Yes, I feel like it lately, since, you know, 2020 was such an incredible year. Um, I felt a very strong urge to be in my studio. And sometimes it's a coping mechanism. I'm active, and I'm coping because I'm holding so much. And so that's one way. And just the thought that I've been, sometimes I listen to things in my studio, music or, messages, but sometimes I just decide to have quiet. And during those times, I sometimes come to discoveries that I have never had yet. And it's it's like,
Mhm.
wow,
Yeah,
at my age, really, I'm learning all these new things. So I
right.
think it's that quiet time, and it's a commitment. I'm seeing it now as it is a commitment to myself. And I was always
Mhm.
afraid of being selfish. And
Mhm.
that's not a healthy thing, because we're supposed to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We have to love ourselves.
Mhm.
And it just didn't really kind of come naturally to me. That's a whole nother
Mhm.
story. But it has been therapeutic to show up for myself, and
Mhm.
to realize and to honor who I am, that I am an artist. It's nothing I've forged. It's nothing, that is like for myself for any
Mhm.
reason except to express. I honestly wish I could just walk downtown and hand everybody my paintings,
Yeah.
but yeah. Anyway, that's another.
Yeah. Yeah, so do you feel that, you know, obviously you're an artist and you sell your artwork and you're a professional at it. in many different ways. I mean, you've been very successful in various ways. But do you feel that any form of art, whether it's music or painting, that it can have a very healing and therapeutic role in someone else's life that doesn't necessarily consider them an artist or doesn't even
Mhm.
consider themselves that great at creating? Do you think that it can be beneficial to someone who really doesn't have the goal of becoming an artist, but you know, what do you think the role of art can play in their lives?
I remember when I learned something when I worked at a Montessori school, because it's so different to have outside validation as opposed to inside validation. And when a child would say, "Look at my drawing," instead of saying, "Oh, that's beautiful," we would say, "What do you think of that?" Because we
Hmm.
wanted to build their own thoughts about how they feel about their own work and build
Hmm.
their own confidence, so they're not, so the validation is a little more balanced because they do get outside validation.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a hard thing for me to have inside validation, and that's another way that I've been growing, just realizing, self-acceptance, radical self-acceptance.
Right, right. I know that for me, I too during the lockdown really immersed myself in my art, and that was a, um, a significant um, you know reason that's as to how I kind of got through the year because it was a really challenging year. And that was always something that kind of took me away and just, I looked forward to going into the studio or to the garage or outdoors and just painting. And I never realized how much art can teach you. And when I really immersed myself in it, in the experience without any goals, just to kind of enjoy the moment and the experience, in that moment, um there were moments where all of a sudden I'd put a color on the canvas and I'd be like, oof, I hate that color. And I thought to myself, why do you hate that color? Like, why would you hate a color? Because I love color of all sorts. And I started to kind of think, like, what does it remind me of? Like, where have I seen that color before? Why is it triggering such an intense response?
Mhm.
And once you start to peel away the layers, you actually start to realize, you start to remember, memories of a time like, oh yeah, like I remember like that teacher used to wear, maroon all the time or whatever it was. I'm
Mhm.
just using an
Mhm.
example. And she was such a mean teacher. And you start to connect the dots, like,
Mhm.
oh, that's why I don't like maroon or that particular shade of maroon because it reminds me of her. And so that actually is very healing because, in my day job, I do something, it's called neurofeedback therapy, and we work with stabilizing the brain. And, one of the things that I know is that when you're able to identify something and then verbalize it and communicate it, both sides of your brain have now just integrated. And when that happens, you can actually let go of that experience. That experience no longer has as much of a trigger for you. It might still
Mhm.
trigger you, but not as intensely. And so, what I learned with art is that it wasn't just something I really loved doing because I love color and I love paint and it's just fun. But I also would have these little memories pop up every so often that created the opportunity for me to integrate an experience from the past. And
Yes.
that is healing. Yeah. So,
You're reminding me of something, Christina, that I had an experience a few years ago. I think it was maybe 2014. Um, I got bit on my nose by a dog, and my nose was really bad, and I had to have stitches, and it was traumatic. It was messy, it was scary, and so I was just kind of traumatized, and I could not stop replaying these moments over and over and over, like all day long for 3 days. And I was like, what is going on? And I thought about it. I go, wait a minute, let me get some pencils out and pastels. And so I just drew it. I drew looking in the mirror. I drew the stitches. I drew the blood. And as soon as I did that, it was crazy. I could not even believe it. The
Yeah.
flashing in my head stopped. The pictures
Yeah.
in my head stopped because I got it out on paper and it didn't afflict me anymore.
Right.
I'm not
So
even afraid of dogs.
yeah, and I find that, it really is an amazing experience, that it sounds so simplistic, and you think, oh, art therapy. Some people are like, oh, art therapy, like it's such a trivial thing. But really, it's such a powerful experience that you often can have with some traumatic things that have happened in your life, or even just to help you process emotions. Sometimes I don't have the words for certain things because either I'm too angry or too sad or whatever, too upset. But if I paint, all of a sudden, all of that, um, all the emotions that are tangled up inside of me just kind of start to release. And I can actually articulate myself better. I can understand, oh, okay, I see what happened. And I can talk about it better, and I'm calmer. And I don't know, maybe it has something to do with the meditative experience that we're kind of in sometimes when we paint, that it just soothes us and we're
Mhm.
able to kind of let things go. Maybe it's that too. I'm not sure, but I think that the act of whatever it is, whether your thing is music or painting or whatever your thing is, I think creating something, the act of creating, can be really healing. So, yeah.
Yes.
Let's see. I think so. My next question, I think we kind of answered it. Okay, so if you had one piece of advice to get past the fear of creating something, what would it be?
Oh gosh, to get past the fear.
Yeah.
I've heard people say this before. Nobody's gonna die. So, and I remember Liz Gilbert saying I wrote down some bullet points that
Mhm.
she said in an interview. She said, what her suggestions were. And one of them was don't overestimate the consequences or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. But it's like don't blow things out of proportion.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Right.
And I wish I could. That's one thing that I really want to give people is that uh, I don't know. It's like that that the drive that dispels fear. It's so
Yeah.
much of a desire to paint that the fear doesn't belong. It's
Right.
it's swallowed up by the
Yeah.
act of painting. So
Right.
yeah. So I would say
Yeah.
nobody's gonna die.
Yeah, and certainly for someone like yourself who's been painting your whole life, I would think that fear doesn't play a major role in you painting. But with somebody who's starting out, I think fear is a very significant emotion that people
Mhm.
feel when they're first
Yes.
beginning.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. It's like no one's going to die. Like, what's the worst that can happen? So maybe you produce something today you don't like, but tomorrow you might like it. And artists do that all the time. Even professional artists, they can have a week of really terrible paintings and then have this magnificent one they create. But it's because they show up all the time that those magnificent ones develop. And I
Exactly.
think sometimes people have the idea that when you're a professional artist, you just pump out good stuff all the time, and that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. It's really I feel like there's these middle stages in a painting that where it can get really weird and like not make any sense and not be good compositionally and and be but when there's all of that history underneath, it shows through in different ways.
Mhm.
It shows through in real texture. It shows through in lighter colors or darker colors coming up through the semi-transparent colors, and I think it has so much more of ourselves in it because
Mhm.
we've just spent more time expressing and being free. And so it's, it's a really valuable part of doing art is to just
Mhm.
make the ugly paintings, but it's also a hard part. It's kind of a hard part because when you look at it as you want it to be a good painting and it's not a painting, and you spend an hour today or 2 hours today, it can be disappointing sometimes. But
Right.
yeah, I do really want people to not have fear,
Yeah.
but
But
it's a
even
real thing.
exactly. And even that I think is a great lesson even as a metaphor for life, right? We learn in art sometimes where we spent like a whole day maybe, putting the paints on and trying to create something beautiful and at the end of the day you're like, "Oh, that's it. Can't do it anymore," right? And you just tell yourself, "Okay, well, you just leave it," right?
Oh,
Okay.
good.
So we're back.
Good, good.
um, all right. And I think that the connection is better too, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, good.
All right. So I've had a piece of rice. All right. So of all the elements of design, which ones do you think are more important in your work?
Uh, I would definitely say color is super important to me. Um, so uh, I also I also feel like value contrast has been super important to me. Especially the last few years, I've grown in value contrast a lot. And movement, I can't get away from movement. I just
Hmm.
can't. I can't do it.
So for people that don't really, haven't done art or painting, what do you mean by movement when you're talking about painting?
So, like, if you think about, say, Mark Rothko's solid, flat planes of color, they're luminescent because they have so many, transparent layers, and
Hmm.
but they're just there. They're just kind of floating.
Hmm.
And when you have like just brush strokes all over the place, and your eye is led in different directions throughout the painting, um, by lines and texture and different
Hmm.
colors, then that's movement. And that,
Okay.
yeah, it's something that I've battled with because I've tried to again, it's kind of like smoothing down the brush strokes, you
Hmm.
know. It's like I just have to go with it, that,
Hmm.
you know, it's expressive.
Yeah. So it's the line work, it's the shapes that and how they relate to each other that actually create the appearance of movement in a
Mhm.
painting, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, it moves your eye.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so now a little bit more philosophical. How do you think that art influences culture?
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I think that's
That
a big
I haven't
question.
thought about. I actually have not thought about that, but I have thought about the fact that, um, when people try to politicize art or try to,
Hmm.
they try to make art be something that, to me, it's not what art is to me. I guess
Hmm.
art to me is a connection of human beings.
Hmm.
And I think that that's so important. And I feel like in our culture as Americans, we have needed to have that connection again. And because people, I live in well, it's not a small town, but, you know, this is not New York, people.
Hmm.
Let's look each other in the eye, please. I just feel like people need to acknowledge each other. They need to connect. And I think that when, as an artist, you put something out that someone connects with and they know that you understand,
Mm-hmm.
They know that they feel your work because it's something that
Mm-hmm.
they feel.
Yeah.
I think that's a connection, and it's
Yeah.
an important connection. And I also think beauty, there's so much ugliness in our culture, um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so much division. And I think art unifies. Art crosses all boundaries. Um, it's it's a healing thing for people,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, I just think beauty is really important for us. I think
Yeah.
it's just we were created with, you know, a deep need for significant beauty.
Mm-hmm. So, so I think what I hear you saying is that art can be a bridge that kind of reminds us that we have more in common than we have differences. Would you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see.
You're a great interviewer.
Ah, thank you. Okay, so should I ask you this one first or this one? Okay. Okay, so here's a bonus question. Is there a question I should have asked you that you feel might benefit the group?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I can't think of one.
No? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I feel like we covered a lot.
Yeah, we did. We
Yeah.
covered a lot. And thank you again so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. It was
Oh,
fun.
my
Yeah,
pleasure. Thank
I
you.
always enjoy picking your brain and
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh,
We
you're
didn't
so
make it
welcome.
totally to the end without it cutting out on us, but you know, considering this COVID situation we're in, this was great.
Yes. So thank you
So,
so much, Christina. I appreciate
oh,
it.
my pleasure. Thank you,
Okay.
Sunshine.
Have a good day. See you
Take care.
soon. See you in a
Bye
couple days.
bye.
Bye.